Welcome back, all you nerds. This is Nerdy by Nature, and we are back at it again. I'm your host, Tyler, aka Agent Smith.
And I'm Charlie, aka Captain Rogers.
And so this is a very special edition of Nerdy by Nature. As we mentioned in our last episode, we will be going over the Star Wars Saga, so the entire film franchise. Of course, we're going to break it up, hit the highlights between each of the trilogies, so the older one, the prequels, and some of the newer ones. And speaking of newer ones, Episode 9 hits theaters as a reminder in December. That's going to be December 20th, so right there before Christmas, following the same release date as the other new movies have. And so, of course, Charlie, the best place to start with the Star Wars saga, logically, is Episode 1. Not exactly the best Star Wars film among all of them, but, you gotta start somewhere.
Right. I just watched the prequel trilogy again this week, and I will say that it was a lot better than I remembered. I do feel like people give it a lot of crap that is not warranted. I mean, some of the special effects are dated, yes, but, I mean, it's still a world jump from the original trilogy, so, I mean, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's a very watchable trilogy, and it's one of those where, like you said, it gets some flack here and there for moments, and I'm sure you could make the argument that it's not quite as good as the original old trilogy from the 70s and the 80s, but on the same hand, it's the building blocks of this entire franchise. You get, very key characters right off the bat with Anakin Skywalker, played by Christian Haydenson. You get Padme, his love interest, played by Natalie Portman. Obi-Wan Kenobi, who is perfectly played by Ewan McGregor. I don't think you could have asked for a better actor or a more suitable actor to play that character. He is Obi-Wan Kenobi to the point that I couldn't even imagine anybody else being Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then, of course, you get Qui-Gon Jinn by Liam Neeson, so you get a powerhouse actor right there. And again, the first episode isn't the best. You kind of have to deal with Jar Jar Binks the entire time.
Yeah, he was in a lot more of it than I remembered, and unfortunately that follows into Episode 2 as well. Yeah, I really enjoyed it a lot more than I remembered from the last time I watched him. The little kid, I don't know who plays him, but young Anakin Skywalker, he got on my nerves the first time I watched the prequel trilogy, and it wasn't near as bad as I remembered watching it this time. But there are definitely key moments and epic moments in the prequel trilogy that I think people, I don't want to say overlook, but they give it such a bad rep, the whole trilogy overall, that you miss or you forget about the epic portions of it. And like you said, Ewan McGregor, he's perfect as Obi-Wan, and he was probably one of the best parts of the prequel trilogy.
Oh, right. In that first episode, you get, speaking of epic moments, Darth Maul's battle between Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan.
Battle of the Fates.
Right, Battle of the Fates, and you get that dual lightsaber action there. And I mean, this Darth Maul guy is somebody that, realistically, I would have loved to have seen more in Episode 1 and learned a little bit more about his backstory. He's kind of a forgotten Sith at the end of the day, but those moments are pretty awesome to watch unfold.
Yes, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see him come around again.
That would be something. I've always wondered, where he's split in half there by Obi-Wan and falls down the tunnel. It seems like that's a recurring theme for Star Wars.
It is.
Villains falling down down a tunnel. I picture them all like being down there like, oh, hey, you two? All right, well, welcome. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, but I don't know if have you ever watched any of Rebels, the TV show?
I have not.
Okay, well, after that happened, he was found in wherever he dropped to, and they did put some kind of mechanical portion. They replaced his lower half with mechanics, and so we'll see what happens there. I will say that he was a lot less of a part of one than I remembered. Like, I thought he was a lot more prominent than he was.
He's really not, though.
Basically. So.
Right, but another big scene, I think, by far, is when they do actually come across Anakin Skywalker. You get to that first look at Tatooine and what it looks like. You reminisce back to, of course, Luke Skywalker's home, his uncle Lars, and so on and so forth. The pod racing is pretty cool. You get to see...
That was cool, yeah.
Kind of a everyday in the life of people on these planets. You sometimes forget, but this isn't just the Jedi Council and the Force and good versus evil. These are just people on planets like ours that are trying to go about their everyday, and pod racing is a part of it. It's kind of like going to the horse races, put it into our terms,
right.
so to speak.
Right.
To expand upon that, later on in the film, of course, Qui-Gon recognizes that Anakin could be this Omni-level Jedi if given the training and the time, and he goes to the Council. This is our first introduction to the Jedi Council, of course, and they, right away, since he's unstable, he's vulnerable, he could be swayed to the dark side. That's going to be a no.
Yeah, I mean, they even say that he's, I believe that he's too old, that they start much younger than that, and so they feel that he's too old, and Qui-Gon, he pretty much takes it upon himself to train him against their better wishes, and says that he will become his responsibility, and that he has faith in him.
And of course, then we also get to see Obi-Wan become a Jedi Knight, and then of course, after the death of Qui-Gon Jinn, he takes over the mantle to train young N.B.N, and we really get to see there towards the end their relationship building, and that more or less leads us right into episode 2,
right,
which essentially jettisons, about 10 years after those events. As I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's that scene where they're coming up the elevator, and Ewan McGregor looks at Christian Haydenson's character and says, you seem nervous, you seem tense, and he's like, well, it's been 10 years since I've seen Padme.
Right. Yeah, I feel like that is an excellent scene, and like you said, going back to showing their relationship and everything, I feel like they did a really good job of that in showing that they actually know each other, and he can tell whenever Anakin is nervous or feeling out of sorts. And by the way, I heard you say Christian Haydenson a couple of times, and it's actually Hayden Christensen. I just wanted to correct that now so that we didn't have another, Johnny Blaze moment. So
this guy.
Yeah, but yeah, like I said, I really enjoyed that scene, and 2 is really, it gets a worse rap than episode 1, at least in the circles that I listen to and the shows that I listen to. That seems to be a lot of people's least favorite, which is odd, because I would have thought that would be episode 1.
I would too. That seems a little bit surprising, although I guess I can see it from a fan standpoint and even from a movie critic standpoint, in the sense that, Christian Haydenson is one of those that...
You just did it again.
Did it again. Hayden Christensen. We did it right by the end of the show, folks.
Right.
That's the important thing. So Hayden Christensen, to me, obviously he's a B-level actor, no offense to him as a whole, but he's one of those that you can just tell he's kind of like a square piece trying to go into a round hole in this one, because you've got a well-versed Ewan McGregor and then, of course, a well-seasoned Natalie Portman, and they seem very natural in their character dialogue throughout the second film, actually throughout the trilogy, let's be honest. Whereas he seems like that awkward guy at the lunch table at the office that's trying to make conversation just to be relevant.
Right.
And so that was painfully obvious to me, but I feel like storyline-wise, this particular trilogy just gets better with each episode, but that's just my opinion.
Right, and I don't feel like he was horrible or that they should have cast somebody else for it. I feel like he did come into his own by the end of the prequel trilogy, but at that point in time, he did not have the acting chops for that part. I feel like he was still really early in his acting career, and it kind of showed compared to the other actors.
Right, and then of course you also get that, you brought this up before we started the show, that very forced relationship between Anakin and Padme, and it's kind of obvious that they're going to go that route. It's going to happen.
Right.
And there's even some moments where Hayden Christensen is kind of a little creepy about it, just to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. They had chemistry, and I mean, it worked out, but I just feel like in the prequel trilogy as a whole, it was just pushed and way too dramatic. That relationship between them, they tried way too hard to make you believe it. I think if they had toned it down, it would have been a lot more believable.
I'd have to agree, and it's one of those that I feel like the audience pretty well just accepts the age difference there, because when they meet...
And that was really odd, right. Honestly.
I was going to say, when they meet, I believe that Padme is already, 18, in prime to be a new queen, or actually is Queen Amidala by that point.
Right.
And then Anakin is just, an 8-year-old kid. They're on Tatooine, so that 10-year difference, which, again, if you think back to some of the earlier Roman empires, I mean, not the first time that there's been a significant age gap when it comes to, marriage or things of that nature, or royal bloodlines.
True.
But still, it's like you said, I don't believe the directors needed to work that hard to sell this love interest. I think we all pretty well knew it was going to go that route based on our knowledge from the original old trilogy of who Anakin Skywalker was, and Luke and Leia, and that whole story. But we still get some good moments throughout this film. We discovered the Clone Army, what that's about, what that looks like, and one of the coolest moments is when Obi-Wan goes out to the planet of Kamino and finds this army, and he's like, well, who ordered this army?
Right.
And they come to find out that it was none other than Sifo Dyas, a previous Jedi Master who 10 years prior had passed away.
Right.
But of course, as we know, and another cool part about this second episode is we see just how undermining the Sith can be. So, of course, Chancellor Palpatine is also, surprise, Darth Sidious,
Right.
pulling the strings, trying to run the Senate and the Republic and take over the galaxy, and he's the one that actually acting as Sifo Dyas still went through with the order of the clone army. And the coolest part that we get in this scene is we get to see Jango Fett, who is the father of Boba Fett.
We actually see a young Boba as well, but obviously he's still a kid, so he's not really doing anything. But I just wanted to make a quick point, thinking about it and going back to what I was saying about it seems like the second one is liked a lot less than the other two of the prequel trilogy. I think a lot of it is probably has to do with people's expectations and what their knowledge of what happens in this prequel trilogy, because if you look at it as a whole, not a lot happens in the second one. The first one, you get introduced to Anakin, and you know who this kid's going to become. And Darth Maul was in it, and he looked like a really awesome character. Whether he did anything or not, there wasn't really much to him, come to find out. But yeah, so I think that had that, and then obviously 3 is where get the turn in Anakin and everything, and we find out where Darth Vader came from. So I think it just had to do with that. It was kind of just not it was a movie to watch to get to the next one. You know what I mean?
Right. It's much in the way that the Last Jedi had to be for The Force Awakens. I shouldn't say had to be, because there's definitely the ways that we'll get to that movie eventually.
Right.
But I do think that The Last Jedi was much in the way like Attack of the Clones, a set-up film to get to that third and final film in the franchise. But we still get to actually see a little bit of Anakin turning, so to speak, or that inner moment where he had to make a big decision as a practicing Padawan, soon-to-be Jedi Knight. And that is, of course, when he, while on Naboo with Padme, is her security guard, he realizes he keeps having these nightmares throughout the entire film about his mother there on Tatooine, and so he has to go back. Claims that he has to go back.
Right.
And ends up finding out that Shmi Skywalker, his mother, was sold to a farmer, Lars, and of course it eventually becomes Uncle Owen.
Mm-hmm.
And so they go, he gets a feeling, finds his mother out on this Tusken Raider campsite where she was kidnapped, and from there he finds his mother, but it's too late. She dies in his arms. And at that moment, that's where it's that important character decision for him. As a true Jedi, he would have, I don't want to say let that moment go, because anybody that loses their mom or their parent, that is incredibly difficult.
Right. Jedi are still human.
Jedi are still human, but a true Jedi,
some of them, I guess.
Some of them, right? So for the ones that are, but even though if you follow the Jedi code, it's a lot in the way like Batman. Kind of to bring him into the discussion here. Batman lost his parents. It was very sad, but he didn't go out and try to
murder everybody.
Right. In the same way with Anakin, he had a choice. He could have, that to him could have just been his moment of closure. Yes, it's very tough. It's very difficult. Mm-hmm. He's allowed to grieve. But what you don't do is what Anakin did, and that's taking out the entire Tusken Raider camp, the men, the women, the children. And that at that moment, I feel like that's where you get that first hint of, okay, this is what the council was talking about with him being vulnerable, unbalanced, unstable.
Yeah, definitely. And it was really odd, that whole conversation with Padme after he carries this out. He goes back and Padme sees that he's distressed and upset, and they have a conversation, and he, to my surprise, at least from what I remembered, he tells her in great detail what he did, and she, I don't want to say she's okay with it, but she just accepts it and I guess forgives him. But I mean, he even told her it wasn't just the guys that took her. I took out the women and I took out the children, the entire group of them. And so that was just, that whole scene felt a little off. And like I said, I don't want to say that she was okay with it, but it seemed like she was a lot more okay with it than I would have thought she would be.
Right, and then the normal person hearing that would have been.
Right.
But of course, if she has that epiphany of, maybe it's time to get out on this one, and I really shouldn't go through with this relationship. But of course, if that happens, we don't have the other films, so we know inevitably she had to make the mistake of being blinded by love, carrying out the relationship.
And fear could probably have played a big part in it too. Just
absolutely.
If he is that unstable, if she rejected him, then what would have happened? So
she could have been next on the lightsaber block, so to speak. And from there, of course, the second one ends with their secret union.
Yep.
And of course, we go right into the third one, where, like you said, we really start to episode 3, and that's where it's the Revenge of the Sith. And yeah, buddy, it sure is, because that's where Anakin really finally takes that final turn. He is completely persuaded by Palpatine there, or Darth Sidious, and just becomes becomes. We really see him rise into that role as Lord Vader.
Right, and the whole discussion where he finally turns, and I mean, I honestly felt for him. I was surprised to find out the reasoning and how Palpatine was able to finally do it, just in that conversation that they had, where he was telling him, that there are ways in the dark side of the Force to save people and keep people, or at least he claimed, keep people that you love alive and safe. And so, looking at it that way, he was having the nightmares and feeling like, Padme was in danger, which he originally had the nightmares about his mother. Come to find out, it was true. That was why he was having the nightmares. So, in 3, he starts having nightmares about Padme dying in childbirth. So, since his nightmares about his mother came true, he starts feeling like that's what's going to happen with Padme.
Right, no reason not to believe it.
Right, and so when Palpatine starts telling him, that there are ways to save her and all that kind of stuff, you almost understand why he makes the turn. But it's still not a good thing, and you realize it. But I didn't remember it being that understandable, I guess.
Oh, yeah, and Palpatine really knows how to pull Anakin's strings by that point.
Definitely.
He knows exactly who he's playing with and who he's dealing with, and he's been running the show this whole time. So he's just always one step ahead of the Jedi Council. And of course, you see and notice that the Jedi Council has this epiphany of, wow, we really dropped the ball on this one. It was an oversight. We've got to do everything that we can to try and correct this before it gets out of hand, and of course they're not able to. Of course, you see a very sad scene with Samuel L. Jackson as Mace Windu. He tries to tell Anakin, this isn't you. There's still time to come back to the light side. And again, you see one of those prime moments where Anakin makes the choice to fully embrace the dark side.
Well, I mean, when Palpatine finally reveals himself, you see Anakin immediately pull his lightsaber, and you can tell that he's conflicted, and he realizes who Palpatine is, and you think that he's going to strike him down, or at least he's ready to fight him, so you feel like he's still on the light side, but unfortunately it doesn't last.
No, and the other thing that's hard to watch, but it's so well done, is the de-evolution of the relationship between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, and to an extent as well between Anakin Skywalker and Padme.
Yeah, I did want to ask you, because I didn't really understand it when I was watching it, but I don't know if you know or not. When it finally comes to light who Palpatine is, he calls a random clone soldier, I don't know what significance that particular one has, but he calls him and tells him, enact Order 66. And so basically everyone of the clone army turns and starts killing off all the Jedi. So do you know, how did he have that control over the clone army?
To the best of my knowledge, since he was the one that was acting as the previous Jedi Master, I'd like to think that he did most of the dealings with the alien race that created the clone there on the planet of Kamino. So I would say he had total, I don't know if it was maybe voice control, or it'd be kind of goofy to say remote control.
Right.
But I would like to believe that he still was the guy pulling the strings, and so it's just kind of easy for us as the audience to accept, Chet's out, he's the one that put in this order. Yeah. Surely he would want, match control, or I don't want to say mind control per se, but I would still even say, since they are docile and pretty well trainable, if you remember in that Attack of the Clone Wars, when Obi-Wan is being shown the clone army, the leader of that base that's showing him around, whose name escapes me right now, explains that, they're very trainable, they can take any order, and they're ready to go here in the next little bit. So I like to believe that it wouldn't be too unfathomable for Palpatine and Darth Sidious to be able to just tell whoever the captain is of the Clone War army, all right, hey, we've trained for this, let's go ahead and put it in place.
Yeah, it just seemed like a quick and weird switch, because they were all fighting on the same team, and then all of a sudden, boom, they're all ready to kill the Jedi.
Right, and so I think that's really how Palpatine wanted it to go. He wanted to finally kind of pull the rug out from everybody's feet, so to speak.
Right.
And so that's done in a great way, and then that leads us, right up to that climactic lightsaber battle between light and dark, between Obi-Wan and between Anakin, and it's what we get is just an amazing back and forth battle all the way to the very end.
Oh yeah, and like I said, Ewan McGregor, he played just perfectly, and I did not remember how intense that fight and that argument, how hurt Obi-Wan was to see Anakin turn to the dark side, and just like you could feel the emotion in the acting of Ewan McGregor during that fight.
Right, and we get that iconic line of, you were supposed to destroy the dark side, not join them.
Right, yeah, and you were my brother, and I mean, it was a lot more intense than I had remembered.
Oh, and especially, when you've got Anakin laying there in kind of the lava ash, burning, quite literally, almost near to death, and just, his last words screaming out that he hates Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
So that was hard to watch. It was like, oh man, this really ends on a rough note.
Yeah, and I'm conflicted in that little line, because it was heartfelt and it was dramatic, but at the same time it almost felt a little over dramatic and just whiny in one sense. And so I will say that Ewan McGregor's lines hit me a lot harder than Anakin's lines in that fight.
I think that's a testament to McGregor's acting ability as opposed to Christensen's.
Right.
And so that really takes us to the end of episode 3, and of course, obviously, Padme gives birth to a pair of twins, one named Luke, one named Leia. They're separated at birth so that Vader is not able to find them or detect them by the use of the Force, so they are sent to the far reaches of the galaxy. Of course, Luke to Tatooine, and Leia becomes Princess Leia, far, far away. And from there, we technically, if you follow the film storyline, go into... It's kind of weird because we go back into episode 4, which is the original old trilogy.
Right.
And you had brought up a great point before we started this particular podcast episode, Charlie, in that it is kind of weird. You almost need like a mental break before going... If you're going to binge watch these, put it that way.
Right.
When you go from episode 3 and then flip the script and go into episode 4, there's a lot that you have to keep in mind when transitioning from in between those two films.
Definitely, yeah, because it was a large jump in time. I mean, it was something like 20 years or 18
Roughly.
to 20 years or something like that, because Luke is in his teens. Not exactly sure. I think he was 18.
I believe he was adult, 18, 19.
But just watching it, and obviously it's two different actors playing the part, so it's gonna feel differently, as well as the prequels not having been made when the original trilogy was made. So you didn't really have all the backstories of the prequels going into the original trilogy, but just seeing Obi-Wan and Darth Vader come back together and meet again, it didn't feel like they had any history. It felt very odd watching it right after watching episode 3. But obviously I don't know that, I'm still trying to figure out, I'm not sure if Obi-Wan at that point knew that Anakin was Darth Vader, or if it was he didn't know it because the audience wasn't supposed to know it.
I would say it was probably the latter, just because this is, if you keep in mind the time frame, this is 1977,
right,
when the movie was first released. So I'd say George Lucas probably, if he wanted to start this franchise off with episode 1, he would have done so. I don't think he would have started right in the middle, so to speak, with episode 4. I feel like to him, he looked at all of the backstory and was like, well, that's nice, but I feel like we could just, go ahead and kickstart here in episode 4. So I think to your point, it probably was the latter for the audience, but now, of course, going back from a fan standpoint, we can kind of fill in those gaps and pieces and flesh out episode 4 with what we've learned in episodes 1 through 3.
Definitely, yeah. I will say it's been a long time since I've watched the original trilogy. I did start watching it, and I got halfway through the second one, episode 5, so I haven't watched the rest of 5 and 6, but just watching them again after this long, there's a lot that happens in them that I did not remember, and so it feels almost like I haven't seen them before. But I mean, it was literally when I was probably, 14 was the last time I watched them, so there's a lot of stuff happening in it that were surprises to me.
And we both own the remastered Blu-ray copies, and they are so beautifully done. Both the original episodes 1 through 3, and then of course the old original trilogy episodes 4 through 6.
Right.
Just gorgeous. But before we get into the bulk of episodes 4, 5, and 6, I do want to talk briefly about the in-between or gap story that is Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. And of course this introduces us to key characters such as Jyn Erso, the daughter of Imperial Engineer of the Death Star Galen Erso. We also get to see a band of characters that are a part of the first Rebel Resistance resistance of the Empire, and so they all come together in this film and essentially take out important members of the Empire along the way. Of course, Jin, being the daughter of Galen, he becomes this Imperial engineer for the Empire and has to come up with these plans for a Death Star type weapon. And so he is the one that actually comes up with a weak spot in the Death Star, which plays an important role. Of course, in New Hope, that's the alleyway that Luke took. He had to have that one shot, that one area right down the tube to implode that Death Star. And they already have kind of a smaller scale version of a Death Star in Rogue One that they used to take out a couple planets to show the Empire invader, hey, this is the power that we're building. We can take over the galaxy with this. We're going to build it on a larger scale. And of course, as the story goes along, you start to really get a sense of where these Resistance characters are coming from. You build a relationship with them, only to unfortunately lose them in the end. It's a very sad scene. They make the ultimate sacrifice play there on the Imperial base where they wind up. I believe it's just a smaller planet where the Empire is using it as a military base to try and get their troops, stormtroopers, trained, things of that nature. And they're also in the process of making parts for this Death Star. And so this is where Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor, played by Diego Luna, go and try to get that message out, that famous, help me Obi-Wan Kenobi, and get those plans out to a Princess Leia. And they're able to do so successfully, but it's one of those where they also know that they're going to have to destroy the planet, because if they get those plans out, the Resistance and Rogue One is not going to have enough time to jump to light speed if they've got Imperials on their tail. So they know it's that 1-2 punch, and they have to get the message out, and they also have to destroy that Imperial base and the planet by, ironically enough, using the same small-scale Death Star weapon against the planet. And it's that moment where you realize, oh, okay, no one's going to make it, but they're making that ultimate sacrifice play for the betterment of the galaxy as a whole.
Gotcha. Yeah, I haven't seen the movie yet. I don't really know why, but I guess I just never got around to it. But I wanted to watch it this week, but it's not on Netflix anymore. So I plan on renting it sometime in the near future, probably from Amazon, and I will watch it because it does sound really interesting, and I've heard it's a really good movie. So
it's one of my favorites among the Star Wars films, I think, just because the story is told so well, and the characters are very relatable, like I said before, and it's got a nice cast of characters. So you've got Felicity Jones as Jyn Erso, you have got a Mads Mikkelsen as Galen Erso, her father, and then of course, like I mentioned before, Cassian Andor is played by Diego Luna, and then you've also got K2SO, who is kind of the C-3PO of this film, only funnier, I would argue. And you've got him played by Alan Tudyk, who of course is a big member in the nerd community, well recognized in multiple roles. So, and also the protagonist, Orson Krennic, is played by Ben Mendelsohn, who, Charlie, you had brought to my attention before we started this episode, is kind of typecast as the bad guy.
Yeah, in most everything I've seen him in, he's been a bad guy up until recently with Captain Marvel, which you think he's going to be a bad guy in that movie too. But I did want to ask you, speaking of Alan Tudyk, have you seen Firefly?
I have watched a few episodes, but I need to finish the first season. I know, letting you down. I've probably lost at this point in the episode. I've probably lost all credit.
This is nerdy by nature.
It is.
That is like
it's a staple.
The show and movie, so you need to watch it.
Serenity. So I do know the movie. So I know enough.
Okay, well, that'll be probably the subject of another episode. So
all right, I'll brush up on my Firefly. All one season.
Definitely. It was short, but it was good.
That's what I've heard, and at least this will be in chronological order, unlike how it was released originally. But to stay in chronological order, we will move on from the gap story of Rogue One and go right into episode 4. And of course, that introduces the iconic characters like Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Chewbacca, otherwise known as Chewie, Han Solo, Darth Vader, of course, whom we've already talked about at length, Jabba the Hutt, Boba Fett, C-3PO, R2-D2, the list goes on and on. Just a bunch of iconic characters that we all know and love today.
Absolutely. So, yeah, like I was saying earlier, I started rewatching the original trilogy this week, and I've watched A New Hope and half of Empire Strikes Back. So, I'm really enjoying it because it's almost like watching it for the first time, because it has been so long since I watched the original trilogy, and there's a lot happening in it that I've forgotten. For one thing, Obi-Wan Kenobi didn't last near as long as I remembered him lasting.
No, gone quick.
I mean, do we call it when Jedi die? Are they dying dying? Or are they just passing over? Or what? Because they all just kind of disappear.
They do.
You know?
They almost kind of ghost force out.
Right.
They phase out into what I assume is their version of another realm or another world, or maybe they become a more metaphysical part of the Force.
Right.
Hard to say.
Which would make sense because, I mean, you still hear Obi-Wan throughout the trilogy. It's not, I mean, his physical being is gone, but you still hear him. Though. You hear his talking to Luke throughout and all of that. But like I said, I did not remember that his physical being only lasted like halfway through. Well, probably more than halfway through A New Hope.
But it's still one of those that's just, it starts off great because it's a movie that for its time cinematically was far ahead of anything that they had seen to date, and it just gripped you right away and left you wanting more after that iconic scene of them, as we've already talked about, imploding the Death Star, and then of course there at the very end, Darth Vader building it back up. We really get to see just how powerful Darth Vader is in this movie, and such a big iconic villain right away, and of course voiced so iconically by James Earl Jones, same guy that did Mufasa, and he's in The Field of Dreams, just one of those voices that commands respect.
Sandlot.
Right, much in the way of a Nelson Mandela. He speaks and you are going to pay attention immediately. Right. So to have that...
Did you mean Nelson Mandela or Morgan Freeman?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah. But Morgan Freeman too. I mean, either way, iconic voices and ones, any three of those guys, wouldn't it be something to have all three of them in the room at the same time? But, still...
So, in case you didn't understand that, I was just saying you were talking about James Earl Jones having such an iconic voice and all that kind of stuff. When you said Nelson Mandela, I was just kidding, saying, did you mean Morgan Freeman? Because obviously Morgan Freeman has played Nelson Mandela at one point.
Right.
And a lot of people say Morgan Freeman has a very iconic voice as well. And so it was just, that just crossed my mind, and I was just joking around.
Undoubtedly so. And yeah, like I said, all three of them have very iconic voices. And to get back into, of course, James Earl Jones as Darth Vader, it's just one of those characters that grips you right away, and okay, this is not somebody you want to mess with. How is our hero to be, Luke Skywalker, going to deal with this? And so we get to see that build and start. And we also get introduced to Han Solo's iconic Millennium Falcon, and so we get to see the mythos behind that. We're not really going to go into Solo, a Star Wars story, simply because, let's be honest, it was pretty much just a cash grab. I mean, it is canon with the rest of these films per se,
right?
But again, it's one of those that you don't, almost like with Rogue One, arguably you wouldn't have to watch either, and you can still get everything that you need from Star Wars from episodes 1 through 3, jump right into 4 through 6, and so on and so forth with 7 and 8.
Yeah, and like I said, I haven't seen Solo either, and I kind of want to keep my perception and thoughts about Han Solo. I just want to keep Harrison Ford in my mind. I don't want to see somebody else as that character, so I let go of that one. I just decided not to watch it.
That's fair. And of course, speaking of Harrison Ford, episode 4 ends with he and Mark Hamill being awarded for their bravery and their heroics blowing up the Death Star, mission complete.
Right.
And at the very end, we see Darth Vader looking out at what is going to be a new and improved Death Star.
Right. And what was that, like, going back to that scene? Why didn't they give Chewie a medal?
He didn't, the hairy guy didn't get any love, did he?
No, not at all.
He was a very integral part as well.
Exactly.
And, no love.
Yeah, and he even did his iconic roar when they gave it to him, and I almost want to think he was yelling, like, what the heck?
Where's mine?
Exactly.
What am I, chopped liver?
Exactly.
Or chopped Chewie?
Chopped Chewie. That sounds like some kind of dish.
Trademark. Trademark it? Trademark it. You heard it here first.
Uh-huh.
But so that brings us into episode 5, which is arguably everyone's favorite episode, The Empire Strikes Back. It's as good as it gets. It got over a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. Not that we always look into or side with a critic review, but it's definitely one that we would have to agree with. Mm-hmm. If we were to nerd rate this particular film, I think it's an automatic 5. It has everything that you want, and it has something for everybody. And it sounds odd because this is one where the villains make a big push, and it's like, well, why would you like a movie where the bad guys get their way?
Yeah.
But it's so much more than that. You have so many emotions that go into this one, so many iconic scenes in this film.
Yeah, and you can tell that Luke, Leia, and Han's relationship are cemented in that movie. I mean, by the end of 4, yes, they were together and they were friends, but when you go into watching 5, you can tell that Han cares about them, they care about Han, and you can tell Luke and Han are like best friends now. So I really enjoyed it in that respect too.
For sure, the character development just goes to new heights in this one, absolutely. And of course, by the end of it, you see that there is a definite love connection there between Han and Leia. And of course, you get those iconic moments where Luke goes off into the Dagobah system, finds Yoda. We get to see him do his full Jedi Knight training. We get some iconic quotes from Yoda where it's do or do not, there is no try. And so that's really cool. Of course, we get to see Jabba the Hutt's palace and what that looks like in that crazy underground world.
Right.
And from that we also get a new character in Lando Calrissian, who we find is an old friend of Han Solo's. So Lando is the original owner of the Millennium Falcon.
Right.
And of course, Han is able to win that away from him, and now it becomes his baby. And so that's interesting. We get a lot of neat scenery as well with the ice planet of Hoth, the cloud city of Bespin, and that of course being where Lando is, and he sort of betrays, unfortunately, the crew there with Han and Leia, and that leads to the iconic fight scene eventually on down the road. Luke, of course, goes after Han and Leia because Lando is working with Lord Vader, gives them up. Of course, Vader tries to pull Luke in, bring him to the dark side. Luke's not having it, so they battle it out. Unbeknownst to him, it's a father and son battle at the time.
Right.
And then, of course, arguably the most iconic scene in the movie that's oftentimes misquoted is that epic scene where Darth Vader reveals, "No, I am your father." And of course, most people mishear that as Luke, "I am your father."
Right. Yeah, that is surprising to me because I always thought it was Luke, "I am your father," but I've since heard that. And actually, that's become part of that whole. Have you heard of the Mandela effect?
You figure I should, for the guy that brings up Nelson Mandela in a podcast on the fly.
Right.
But no.
Well, anyway, it's basically where a number of people believe something happened one way versus another way, and so it's like, is it evidence that there's a multiverse, or that there's different dimensions or something like that? There's a lot more to it. I'm not going to explain the whole thing.
Fair enough.
But
maybe another podcast.
But yeah, but that line, how you said, a lot of people remember it as Luke, "I am your father," but it was really, "No, I am your father," and so they attribute that to that effect. But
Neat concept.
yeah, but I think that one's a weak example of that effect, honestly.
Especially when you got the audio right there and can go back and play it over and over and over again.
Exactly.
But to each their own. If you want it to be Luke, "I'm your father," that's perfectly fine.
It's whatever.
Do the whole Chris Farley into a fan. We won't judge.
Right.
And so, of course, also from that battle, Luke iconically loses his hand, much in the way, if you think about it, happens to Anakin Skywalker. Lord Tyrannus does the same motion, so that kind of comes full circle in a roundabout way. And of course, in the original trilogy, we don't really know that because we haven't even conceived of the episodes 1 through 3 yet. But for those that watch it chronologically like we have, it's just that nice, this is a lot like how that was for Anakin.
Right.
So it's very fitting in that sense. And then really from there, we get right into Return of the Jedi. And so that is, of course, the last installment of the original old trilogy, where we see the evil empire, if you will, led by Emperor, aka Darth Sidious, and they're trying to rebuild a second Death Star. Because, of course, the overarching purpose of The Empire Strikes Back was to try to persuade Luke Skywalker to join the dark side. That didn't work out. So their plan B is, well, we don't really need him. It would have been nice to have him. Would have been a power couple, between father son. Could have reigned for millennia. But next best thing, we'll rebuild our Death Star and still take over. And if it push comes to shove, Lord Vader will pass his ultimate test and defeat his son.
Right.
And so, of course, they go on from there throughout the rest of the film, of where it becomes a chase. The heat is on, so to speak. Han Solo and company go out with their quest to make sure that they stop the Death Star from even being completed.
Right.
And they end up doing so. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we get introduced for the first time to the Ewoks and the kind of like teddy bear version of Star Wars, and it's like a cutesy character. Let's be honest, this particular...
Yeah, they're evil, though.
Oh, they can be. Yeah.
They are brutal.
For sure. Don't let the furry faces fool you.
Right.
But nevertheless, this is a kind of lackluster end to what is ultimately a great trilogy, but I do feel like we can say that sometimes the third film in any franchise isn't always the best.
Yeah, most of the time you can say that. I don't know. I thought this trilogy was great from start to finish.
Oh, I would have to agree. I just know that there are some out there that, that came out of Empire like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to see how this ends. And then they saw Return of the Jedi and they were like, oh, well, okay. And of course, in the end of Episode 6, we see the Rebel fleet going on a full-out attack on this nearly completely constructed Death Star, the second Death Star, Part 2. And fortunately, that does not happen because they are able to thwart that, and we get the iconic scene where Luke Skywalker faces off one more time against Darth Vader, now fully trained, ready to go, and they battle it out. And of course, there at the end, he is able to more or less turn Darth Vader back over to the light side. He's always seen that in his father now that he knows, who his father is, who his father was.
Right.
And of course, to go back to the very beginning in Episode 4, Obi-Wan had mentioned that Luke Skywalker's father had died a long time ago, of course, overall meaning that Anakin Skywalker, there was the death of Anakin Skywalker with the birth of Darth Vader.
Right.
And with that, of course, you also get that, again, a lot of iconic moments in Return of the Jedi as well, when Vader realizes, this is my son being killed by Darth Sidious, I can't let this happen. And so, of course, he picks him up, and as we see in other Star Wars films, throws him down the chute.
Yeah, that kind of seems to be a theme.
It seems to be a recurring theme, as we mentioned earlier in the top of the podcast, so...
Do you think that they specially designed shafts for
villains?
For that?
They might. That could be the Star Wars villain shaft move. I don't know. So maybe that's what's going to happen here in Episode 9. We'll see. And also with that, of course, with the trailers that we've seen from Episode 9, we get that iconic Palpatine laugh at the end. And sort of the best of our knowledge, he's back.
Yeah, it seems like he's going to end up being the baddie of the overall saga.
Right. And there, like you had said, we talked about this before this episode, there's the possibility that, maybe him being in, as we see chunks and debris of that old scene in towards the end of a trailer of a destroyed Death Star, partially destroyed Death Star.
Right.
So maybe that's where he was found. Maybe Snoke was able to go back and pick him up. There's all kinds of different theories right now.
We'll get there,
and we'll get there. But first, we need to awaken the Force and go over Episode 7, and then of course discuss the Last Jedi,
the most controversial
Episode 8.
But yeah, the Force Awakens, I was so excited for that movie. I went and saw it opening night, and I actually even went alone. Me and my sister and my brother-in-law were going to go see it the weekend that it opened, but I started watching reviews of it and people talking about it on the night that it released, and so I just at the last second bought a ticket and went to, I believe it was like a 10 p.m. showing, and of course, thankfully, there's a theater right down the road from my house, but yeah, I enjoyed The Force Awakens very much, but I think it was a good movie, and I feel like it was a really good start to this last trilogy, but I wonder how much of my enjoyment was, oh, Star Wars is back, it's been so long, versus, oh, this was a really, really great movie, you know what I mean?
And I think that's a fair thing to say, because it had been quite a while since we went back in time, so to speak, with those episodes 1 through 3, and then here we jettison back into the present of this storyline in the new trilogy, and so I think it was that mix, like you said, for a lot of people of, yay, Star Wars is back, and then, okay, well, what direction are they going, and how is this going to look, and what is this going to look like? And we're introduced to key characters, of course, such as Rey, Finn, Poe Dameron. We also get to see BB-8, which is probably the cutest little droid you've ever seen, and so that's a nice little character that's added into the fold as well. So it's just interesting to see them. It's beautifully done by J.J. Abrams, who really took the reins on this first movie and put belief into the fan base of, hey, we're going to finish this in the right way, and we're going to go about it so that it all made sense, and here's what we got.
Right, and honestly, I I know that they said, and they started out this trilogy saying that each episode was going to have a different director, and I almost wish that they just let JJ go ahead and do all three of this last trilogy, because I feel like it would have been a lot more cohesive and put together. I didn't hate The Last Jedi, but I understand and I see a lot of the flaws that a lot of people see and talk about, and so I understand a lot of the critiques. I think it gets a lot more hate than it should. People can be very toxic about the things they love.
Oh yeah, especially on the comment section.
Right, and the internet,
Everyone's a film critic, more or less.
yeah, and everybody's just, they'll say what they wouldn't say to your face.
True.
Let me put it that way.
Very true. And the Last Jedi is completely a watchable film, and it's what you would expect from a Star Wars film.
Right.
But to your point, and to those with the criticism, it is merited in certain aspects, because we don't really get a lot of our questions answered. It takes a 180 from everything that was set up so beautifully by J.J. Abrams in The Force Awakens. So, for example, Rey's backstory, where she comes from, this, quite literally, aptly named, The Force Awakens inside of her.
Right.
And so then she goes on this quest by chance, runs into Finn, a stormtrooper turned resistance fighter, or a big deal, as Han Solo calls him, or as he claims himself to be, trying to impress Rey initially. And so, of course, all of these characters come together, as they often do in times of need in these Star Wars films, and the plots work themselves out, and they all end up being interconnected in one way or another.
Right, and going back to what I was saying about, had it been that the whole trilogy was done by J.J. Abrams, the difference between The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, it just doesn't seem like J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson were on the same page. It didn't seem like they even really communicated with each other.
No, it didn't seem that way to me, and it didn't read that way to me when I watched both of the films.
Right, they feel totally different to me.
I wouldn't say disjointed, because there is some continuity to an extent.
Definitely.
But again, like we said before, it's just one of those where we had the table set in Force Awakens, and then the tablecloth was ripped off in The Last Jedi.
Yeah, and I'm glad that JJ's coming back and doing episode 9, and I hope he explains a lot of the stuff that's kind of doesn't necessarily fit with each other, or some of the differences between the movies, but at the same time, I don't want him to retcon everything and try and fix everything, because I think that that'll hurt things more than it'll help things.
I'd have to agree, and with The Force Awakens, it sets up the main villain, or at least who we assume will be the main villain, in Kylo Ren.
Right.
So it introduces us to him for the first time. We also get to see this new Sith Lord Snoke, which that's where, again, The Last Jedi gets a little problematic, because Kylo Ren, after he has multiple, what was it that you called it before the episode? It was the Force Skype?
Force Skyping between Kylo and Rey.
And so that's, one of the many problems with the film, is that, that's not necessarily explained. It's something that we're seeing for the first time. Is this something that they've had access to all along? So that poses questions, and then we never really get to understand or learn much in the way of who Snoke is, or how he rose to power, or just how powerful he is. We're teased a little bit with how powerful he is in the presence of Rey. He tries to show her, like, if I wanted to right now, I could crush you, but I won't.
Right.
And then, of course, much in the way that Kylo Ren turns on Han Solo, a very sad moment in The Force Awakens. Not one that I was prepared for, just to be completely honest. I don't think a lot of audience members were. But it made sense, given Kylo Ren's character and his arc. It's one of those where he had to have that turning moment to remain on the dark side.
Right.
And that would be to take out your father, that being Han Solo. And, of course, his mother being Princess Leia.
Right. And, yeah, that was very surprising. I expected him to last throughout this last trilogy, but I do feel like that was Kylo's final test and final way to push the light out of himself. There are a lot of theories that he will be redeemed, but I don't know. I don't really see a path to redemption for him.
It's hard to imagine, especially the way that he was continued in the second installment of this new trilogy in Episode 8, where he tries to convince Rey, hey, let's do away with the Jedi Order and with the Sith Lords and the Empire and the First Order. Let's start anew. You and I, we can take on the galaxy and conquer and make our own rules, much in the same way that Anakin was trying to do that with Padme,
right,
more or less.
Right, and like the moment that they do away with Snoke and Kylo and Rey fight with each other, I thought for a minute that was going to be his turning point, and you could tell that Rey thought that was going to be his turning point as well. Until after that fight, they have the conversation: "Come with me. We need to go meet up with the Resistance." And Kylo's like, "No, I want you to stay with me, like you were saying, and we can rule the galaxy together." And at that point, you see that Rey is done and knows that there's no turning back, and she leaves.
I feel like to an extent it almost had to go down that way, because that sets up the third film in such a way that, of course, obviously, Rey is the light of the Force, is the hero, is the Luke Skywalker, to Kylo Ren, aka, you want to call it,
as far as we know
right now. Now, of course, contrary to popular belief, potentially, in the little teaser that we got from D23, as we talked about in the previous episode, there is a scene, and we're not entirely sure if it's Rey. It looks a lot like her, or a twin. Well, it could be a clone. Who knows? It would appear that there's the potentiality for her to turn over to the dark side, but again, that could be her trying to play the chess game and get in the mind of Kylo Ren and make him think that she's turned, and then she'll flip the script. That almost seems too easy, and like we said, I don't think they would give away such a massive plot point in a teaser like that, so I think it's just more something to get people interested of, oh, okay, this J.J. Abrams is back, and he's going to do it right, and he's going to, like you said, the cleanup effort is going to be a tall task, but I think if anybody can do it, J.J. Abrams is somebody that can pull it off.
Yeah, definitely.
And so now that we've gone over what we did and didn't like about this new trilogy, I think it's a good time to go over some of our lesser characters, but ones that maybe were our favorites or that stood out. And I think for me, Maz Kanata, played by Lupita Nyong'o, she beautifully voiced the character, and even though it's a completely CGI'd character, undoubtedly her personality comes to life on the screen, and I think it's a very believable old friend of Han Solo's. Even though it's one that we are introduced to for the first time in The Force Awakens, she does a good job of making it feel like this is somebody that Han's known for a long time. And while it does pose a little bit of a problem, storyline-wise, I'll let you handle that, Charlie, since you're passionate about it, and I don't blame you, I'm that way too, but I still really liked her character as a whole and how she fit into the first storyline.
Yeah, and I agree. I really liked her character. I liked her a lot more in The Force Awakens. Her one scene in The Last Jedi, it seemed unnecessary. I mean, it was just kind of like a throwaway joke scene, is what it felt like to me, at least. And it felt very convenient that she would know exactly what to do and who to find, how to help them. But, I mean, she owns this bar, so she sees a lot of things. She talks to a lot of people. So, I mean, you can definitely say that it's plausible, I guess. But it just seemed really convenient. But, so yeah, there's a lot of little nitpicks and stuff in The Last Jedi that I feel will need to be explained somehow in Episode 9 in order to appease fans. But at the same time, yeah, almost as toxic as people can be and as toxic as the fandom has become, it's almost like you really don't want them to necessarily answer all of it. You know what I mean? Like, don't give them ammunition. Because I do feel like they've been way more harsh and judgmental to this last trilogy than is ever warranted.
Right. Now, I will say one last critique that we probably should talk about on The Last Jedi before we go into our predictions for Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, is the sense of, so two things. So, of course, how in the world did Maz Kanata come to have his lightsaber?
Right.
And also, one of the biggest issues I think that kind of put a craw in a lot of the fans were, it didn't necessarily seem like Luke was quite himself in The Last Jedi as far as his character and his archetype.
Right, yeah. And unfortunately, Mark Hamill has made it quite clear that...
Very evident.
Yeah, that he was not necessarily satisfied or happy with the way The Last Jedi went. I know that he has backed off of it and tried to steer clear of doing that, but if you watch any of the interviews that he's done, he's been pretty clear that The Last Jedi was not necessarily the interpretation version of Luke that he wanted. And so I feel like J.J. Abrams has got a lot of work to do on this last one, but like you said, if anybody could do it, I feel J.J. Abrams is the one to do it.
Right, and to clarify with the whole Luke Skywalker character in The Last Jedi, he becomes somewhat of a recluse in a unfindable destination in the galaxy. Of course, not so much because Rey is able to get the map to Luke Skywalker, and that's the big cliffhanger ending of Force Awakens. It's she and he, they're on the rocks, and she's got the lightsaber. And I think one of the funniest memes to come out of that Force Awakens was the one that had Luke looking at Rey, and he said, "There was also a hand. Did you get the hand as well?"
I don't remember that.
Oh yeah, it was a good one. So it was
Wow.
a panel style meme where Luke was looking at Rey, and she has the lightsaber in the next panel. And then in the return panel, it's got Luke saying, "There was also a hand. Did you get the hand?" And then the last panel is just Rey's face blank.
Right.
Of course, like what?
That is hilarious.
So that was, I'm not sure a fan made it, but it was pretty well done, pretty
Right.
hilarious moment.
Right.
But all that to say, in this beginning of The Last Jedi, Luke gets the lightsaber, tosses it over his shoulder, so right off the bat, I think people were like, whoa, he would never do that. And
Right.
then, of course, he eventually plans on burning all of the old Jedi text. And
Right, and actually, Mark Hamill has also said that Luke wouldn't do that. That's one of the main things that he's said over and over, is that Luke would not toss the lightsaber over his shoulder and just say, no, I'm not doing this.
Right, but he comes up in a big way there towards the end of the film, which leads into one of the two coolest scenes, I think, of the Last Jedi, arguably. And the first one, of course, being when the Rebel fleet ship goes light speed into the First Order's attack ship and just cuts it, not necessarily in half, as it does kind of veer off to the left, but still takes out a significant chunk. So cinematically, that was just a very well done scene and very impactful when you realize the gears start to turn when she starts to turn it around, and you realize, okay,
Right.
she's gonna go full light speed and plow right through the wing of this, bring it down to allow the rebels to get onto the planet, where of course Kylo Ren pursues. And then you get that really neat other cool scene where Luke eventually makes his presence known and felt, and you think for a second that Luke is there on the planet about to take on Kylo Ren face to face. It's like, oh, we're about to get this big, this next iconic battle scene between light and dark.
Right.
And it turns out to be even better than that, really, because Kylo Ren thinks he's going to strike down the famed Luke Skywalker, when in all reality, it's basically just a hologram
Right.
of Luke, him using the Force on his unfindable rock.
Right. Yeah, and all that stuff really didn't bother me, but I will say that that was another big critique that I've heard a lot about The Last Jedi. Just all of the new stuff that the Force can all of a sudden do.
Right.
Now, granted, obviously not everybody knows everything about the Force, but just Luke, teleporting himself as a hologram halfway across the galaxy, and the whole Force Skyping between Kylo Ren.
You could say Kylo Ren. I mean, essentially, they're both, the ones that are Skyping each other. It's kind of a combo conversation that they're having,
Right.
that they're having together. But yeah, no, that really was one that kind of confused me as I was watching this one, just because, like you said, we don't have this expert knowledge of what the Force is, what it really means, or what it can really do. We've seen it over a number of films, but it's never really been expanded upon.
Right.
And even Luke himself says in The Last Jedi, when Rey says what the Force is, she, I believe, more or less says, oh, you can control people's minds and make things float. And Luke's like, I mean, that's the base level of
Right.
the Force, but it's way more than that.
Right, yeah, and to recap, I mean, like I said before, I don't think that The Last Jedi deserves all the hate that it gets. It wasn't my favorite, but I still enjoyed it. I still would watch it again today. But yeah, like I said, The Force Awakens was great. It was, Star Wars is back. There was a lot of excitement. And then The Last Jedi was okay. I'm excited for episode 9, and I'm excited that JJ's back, and I just can't wait to see what he does with it.
And it'll be interesting to see what he does with it, because we've already said multiple times throughout this synopsis episode, there is a lot that he'll have to do do to bring this to a close. So much so, we've even talked about this before the episode, that maybe, just maybe, they might even need to split this into a part 1, part 2,
Right.
which would be odd for episode 9, to have episode 9 part 1, episode 9 part 2, but not out of the realm of possibility to need 2 films to bring this saga to a rightful close, or a 3-hour film.
Yeah.
One of the two, I think, is probably what we're going to get.
Well, I think that a 3-hour film would probably be more likely at this point than them splitting it. I don't see them splitting it, especially since we haven't heard any kind of rumors that could happen. I just hope that JJ is able to do what he needs to do to finish it strong and appease as many as he can.
No, I think he'll do a good job of balancing that, and that's kind of fitting, really, if you think about it, because of course this overarching message is that somebody, whether it's Rey or whomever, is supposed to ultimately bring balance to the Force and end this clash between evil and good. So I'll be very interested to see how he does that. I want to see a few things that I want to see from this film is, does Rey ever find out more about herself and about her upbringing? Whether or not she ever actually finds her parents, I don't expect that, but at least maybe to get some light shed upon maybe who they were,
right,
or who they could have been, to see if Kylo Ren ultimately becomes this ultimate dark side lord, and whether or not he makes it, I doubt it, but there is a possibility that maybe, just like Darth Vader, he turns at the very, very end and has an epiphany.
Right.
Possible, but I'm not going to bank on that but by any means.
Right.
And of course, I'll also be very interested to see how they expect us to accept, or how good a job they do at bringing Palpatine back into the fold, and where he's been all this time, and that backstory. And if you brought up a great point earlier before the show as well, that he knew of a previous Dark Lord way back before even the episodes 1 through 3,
right,
that knew of a way to cheat death, quote unquote. So maybe he also figured this out himself and has been altering himself over the years, and didn't really, it was never really shown that he was actually gone there in the end of Return of the Jedi. He just was thrown over by Darth Vader, and we assumed, oh, well, he's out of the picture.
Right, yeah, and so the main thing I feel that needs to come out of episode 9 is an explanation of Snoke. Just some kind of backstory or, reasoning for his existence, basically. I mean, obviously he's a Sith Lord, he's evil, but that's all we know. So,
and that's all we got.
Right.
Over these first 2 films. We didn't get any kind of backstory or how he rose to power, what his overall importance was to the storyline. So again, like we said, there's a lot that's going to need to be tied up here to bring proper closure to this Star Wars saga. That's everything that we've seen in the trailer keeps saying, the end of the saga. This is the end of Star Wars. It's the story brought to a close. So
definitely.
Hopefully we're not left with wanting more, because we more or less got that feeling with The Last Jedi, so I don't think we need a repeat performance.
Exactly. So, but really that's everything. So
I think we went over the full gamut, hitting the highlights between episodes 1 through 8. There's a lot to cover, but we certainly hope that you enjoyed the material. And of course, I continue to listen. We appreciate each one of you out there that has been listening from day one, or those that just started. Feel free to share this with as many people as possible. As we always ask, be sure to like the page and comment. Let us know what you would like to hear moving forward. We're always up for new discussions, new material. We're not just comic book and sci-fi based. We go into all things nerdy that's nerdy by nature, not comic by nature, or
definitely
Star Wars by nature. Maybe more so for this episode, but you get where we're getting at.
Oh yeah.
And we had brought up, Cap, earlier that the show Firefly, and that's just a fun show. It's a great sci-fi cult classic, one that had a rough go of it in its only season. Wasn't really shown in chronological order, but of course it is available streaming on the Hulu platform for those of you that have it, and it's actually shown in chronological order, so it all makes sense. And so it's one that I think would be neat to sort of stay on this otherworldly sci-fi kick, take a break like we have from the comic book world before it ramps back up again this fall. And if you're comfortable with it, Charlie, why not? Let's go ahead and dive right into Firefly and break that down this next time around.
Yeah, I'm more than willing. I love that show. I've seen it in the past several times, so I would love to watch it again. And so I think we should watch the one season season, and then they also did a movie to conclude it after it was canceled after that first season. Unfortunately, it didn't get the love that it needed for it to continue when it originally came on, but it's a very interesting show and very entertaining. Be happy to discuss it.
Right, there's a lot of fun characters throughout both the actual season and then, of course, the movie Serenity as well. And a lot of pretty much all of the main cast comes back to the best of my knowledge. So we'll be sure to watch all of those again and be bringing you all kinds of fun Firefly information in the next edition of Nerdy by Nature. But until then, again, we just ask that you continue to listen and enjoy the show. So signing off, I am Tyler, aka Agent Smith.
And I'm Charlie, aka Captain Rogers. God bless.